Hello, everyone, and welcome to Politics and Prose. My name's Grant. I'm a bookseller here, where we host a range of in-store events, trips, and classes. Before we get started today, I'd like to ask everyone to please silence your cell phones as to not to disrupt the event. When it gets time for the Q&A portion, we have a mic set up by this right pillar. Please speak into the mic. Today's event is being live streamed. Today, I'm very excited to welcome Lawrence Burney, celebrating the release of the new book, No Sense in Wishing. Lawrence Burney is a writer, critic, and the founder of True Laurels, an independent magazine covering Baltimore's music and culture scene. His work has appeared in publications such as New York Magazine, GQ, and Pitchfork. He has also worked at The Fader, Vice, and the Baltimore Banner. His first book, No Sense in Wishing, explores the profound ways albums, films, and other cultural artifacts leave lasting impressions, shaping who we are. Burney will be in conversation with Hanif Abdurraqib. Abdurraqib is a poet, essayist, and cultural critic from Columbus, Ohio. His poetry has been published in Muzzle, Vinyl, Pan American, and various other journals. His essays and music criticism have been published in The Fader, Pitchfork, The New Yorker, and The New York Times. He is the author of multiple poetry and essay collections, including his most recent, There's Always Next Year, and one of my personal favorites, Go Ahead in the Rain. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming to Politics and Prose, Lawrence Burney and Hanif Abdurraqib.
All right. How's everyone doing?
How are you?
I'm good. Yeah. How are you?
I'm good. I've been moving a mile a minute for the past week, but I'm grateful. Thanks for everybody that came out today. I'm excited.
In the moment, I remember a thing that was kind of like, felt like whiplash for me when I wrote my first book, which was a book of poems, was that I had lived with the book for so long. And then when it came out, I was so detached from it in a way. And I remember we talked in Providence about this kind of thing where you're like, oh, I'm kind of working on this next thing and this next thing and this next thing. How has it been to kind of live with the reality of the material book in the world, which is, or the product? I think the product is different than the work. How has your brain been able to kind of separate the celebration of the product from maybe the distance from the work?
It's been hard to separate so far. I think it's such a new feeling. Like I've never had a book before. This is my first time having one, and I'm just still kind of amazed at its existence. Even though I've been kind of sitting with it for months before it came out. I don't know. I feel it feels nice. I think also reading from it for the past week and talking about it is kind of placing me back into the book. And in some ways, it's getting me into that like self-criticism mode of like, okay, I wish I would have changed this or changed that. But it's nice though. It's actually like motivating. It makes me want to get back in the lab and continue to work. But it's been great.
Yeah, because you're never like done with the shit, right? That's the thing
Ever.
is you finished the product, but your brain is never done with the actual work.
Yeah,
Your
like
brain is still
yesterday.
placing the work.
Yeah, yesterday somebody asked me like, when did you know you were finished? And I just did. I just
That's
like
also
when.
the worst question in the world. It's one of the worst questions that I think interviewers ask all the time.
No, it was just like I was like when my editor gave me a deadline.
Yeah.
That was
That's
was
the
it.
answer.
Because I tried, like, I got one through, like, on the buzzer. Like, my editor is in here somewhere. It was, like, that day where she was like, this is finishing today. I'm like, okay. Well, I was thinking this sentence was better with, like, this word instead of that one, even though I had it that way before. Can we switch it back again? So I needed to be pulled
Yeah.
away from it.
So, sorry if you're an interviewer who asks that type shit, but there's like no good. The answer to that is someone said we need the book on this date. And so
Yeah,
like
'cause I
you
would
actually
still be
don't
writing it.
determine when you're finished.
Yeah, I would still be writing it right now if it wasn't for a deadline.
And you are in some ways, right? Like I think if you're lucky, the next several books will still have elements of this book in it. So in some ways, you are still writing this book.
Yeah, for sure.
You know what I mean? You have a career, and you open the book in the intro with this. You have a career that's been so hyper focused on telling the stories of others, or being kind of witness and then articulating that which you've witnessed. And it can be jarring to kind of have the lens turned back on the self, even if that's just what you were. And so, like, I'm interested in what drove you to make this book, even though you're saying like this is not the book I would have written, but it is the book?
I think there's multiple answers to that question. I think like at first I actually didn't want to write a book about myself. I actually wanted to continue that track of telling maybe unsung people's stories. I think for the past decade or so, that's kind of how I made a name for myself, is just telling the stories of people who I know whose work is worthy of being praised and worthy of being contextualized, but maybe the grander audience of people maybe outside of my home region don't really know who these people are. I wanted to keep doing that, but something told me maybe people won't care that much about that. Like maybe I need to pull people into my own story first. You know, I think about people like, you know, I think about your first essay collection. I think about Kiesse's first essay collection. I think about Ta-Nehisi's memoir, A Beautiful Struggle. And I kind of just studied the way that you all navigated things after that. And I think it's really valuable as a writer to pull people into how you see the world first. And then once you do that, you can get a little more ambitious, you know. But I still made sure, even though I focus on myself, so much of these essays, I'm still being a music critic. I'm still being a culture critic. I don't think I know how to not do that. Even when I'm talking about myself, I'm only talking about myself to set up the argument that I'm trying to make in the essays.
I to me, this felt like a book of music criticism more than like a book of kind of you know, the capital P personal essay. That also feels like it doesn't mean anything, like that as an overarching genre, that doesn't mean much, because the personal essay is only as personal as a person's concerns is articulate, you know? And so for me, because so many of the concerns were lensed through music, this was like a real rigorous book of pop culture criticism. And it had me walking away from it and thinking, and I mean, I know, again, when we were in Rhode Island, we talked about these kind of frustrations of pop culture criticism not being a viable, like there's just actually no real language for it in the mainstream universe. And I was interested in what you thought specifically, and we don't talk about the album itself, but I was interested in what you thought about the rollout of the Clips album, which to me felt very much like, I was like, oh shit, this feels, I mean, even to a point where it like leaked early, I was like, shit, the blog era might be back, you know what I mean? Like the whole rollout felt very blog era-y, and then it leaked early, and I was like, damn, we back in like 07, 08.
They were throwing shots at people.
Yeah,
like,
it was.
We were trying to get attempts at beef again.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, I haven't loved the rollout. I think I'm also like kind of struggling with how I feel about the album. Like I sat with it maybe once all the way through and kind of scattered through it at other points, and I think it gets really good as it goes on, but there's something about the beginning of it that feels dated. Like I think those first two songs feel like Watch the Throne-esque in a way that I don't really enjoy. Like I think it's like this grandiose rap
it's this
feeling.
thing, you know what it is? Because everyone was like, man, that first song. And I was like, do I have the same album as everybody else?
Yeah, that happened to me yesterday. Like in the writers group chat that I have, there were like 3 people who were like, "Oh my God, that first song, it kind of made me shed a tear. I was holding a tear back, and I was like,
maybe is my shit on shuffle?
I actually don't like that song. I actually didn't like that song at all. I actually wish it started at the 3rd track.
Tyler thing.
Yeah, I think that's the first good song. If I'm being honest.
Restraining myself because I don't want to get too deep in it. But I think I actually like Chains and Whips okay, but I actually think Chains and Whips fails itself because we heard it. I mean, some people heard it already. And then we heard so much about the lore of the song because this is a song they had to like pay all that money, got a contract and all that shit. Yeah. And then I heard that Kendrick verse and I was like, so this is what $1.5 million verse sounds like, you know what I mean? And so I like Chains and Whips. I agree with the first songs, but I'm curious why you didn't like the rollout, but I also will say that I'm struggling with the album in that I think there's good rapping on it, like a lot of good rapping, but it seems primarily concerned. Alphonse Pierre wrote a great review on it, where he said this thing where it's like, it seems like they're concerned with reminding people how important clips are, as opposed to making a body of work that. But I love Malice, very proud of Malice. I think he rapped and wrote very well on that record. But why didn't you like the rollout?
I think for the same reason Alphonse said, like I think 2 interviews served the purpose of like the other 8 that they did. It was like the clips is back. We're better than all of these people. These other people don't rap. We rap. And after a point, I was just like, I just want to hear it. Like I actually don't want to hear you talk about it anymore. I just want to hear the music. But I understand there was so much fanfare, so much anticipation, and maybe because we lived through the clips, it's hard. It's hard to actually grasp it. It's been 16 years because I remember till the casket. Is it till the
casket
I was
drop?
about to say when the casket drops, but I remember till the casket drops being a big moment when it came out, and it doesn't feel as long ago as it actually is. But I guess they kind of had to do this.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was impressed by a media landscape that could sustain a somewhat old school rollout, even if I thought the content of it was. I wish that people would have asked different questions, and this is kind of what I'm getting at. Whereas it was great to see a media landscape sustain that, and then when I walked away from your book, I was like, I wish someone like, or Lawrence, I wish someone like Alpha, like I wish there were people in the room to ask them more interesting questions. And so it feels like there's this gap that exists in the desire for what people want in terms of the way they want to see music contextualized. And then, I mean, I guess respectfully or not, whatever, or the people who are like in the positions to provide that. How do you think that gap will be closed, or do you think that the actual music criticism has to now happen at a remove from the artist, such a remove that the people writing are maybe unconcerned with the artists themselves seeing it?
I think it has to go in that direction because I think the lines have really been blurred between access journalism and criticism, where I think the artists have so much leverage now that they dangle this kind of like, if you say something I don't like, I'm only going to greenlight my interview with you if you let me choose who interviews me. And I think that line of thinking already sours the whole situation. You know, I think what I think it does to music journalists or people who are aspiring to be music journalists, it already conditions you to pull back in your honest criticism because you don't want to be punished. And I think people want the opportunity so much that you kind of make a gauge.
Yeah,
it's like I have
judgment.
If I want my pitches to be accepted again, I have to play ball. And that's why I think I even tweeted. I have not been tweeting in the past like month or so. I'm super proud of myself. I didn't think I could ever get to that point. I'm not gonna lie. I actually deleted Twitter off my phone.
Hey.
Yeah. I deserve a clap for that, I think. But I actually deleted it off my phone. But
That's an achievement, my brother.
I think one of the last, like, kind of passionate conversations I was part of, and I don't remember what struck this conversation, but it was the critic thing again. And I think it was some artist lashed out at a publication. I can't remember who or why or how. But it just kind of led me to go on this kind of rant where it was like, okay, if artists want to dangle access, why don't we just go back to being actual critics? Yeah. Why do we need to write in a way that would entice an editor to be like, okay, I think you'll be right to talk to this person, rather than just critically engaging with the work? I think it's to a point where profiles are so uninteresting that
uninteresting.
And I just wrote a profile, you know, and maybe it wasn't that interesting because the two weeks before it came out, another publication ran a profile of that same artist, and I was just like, damn, they did the same thing. They went to Turnstile. Yes, they
I thought your Turnstile one was good. I didn't think the other one was very good.
Well, I appreciate that.
I think it's a question of the.
But I was very frustrated by the structure of like they kind of did the same activity.
Yeah.
They talked about the same things. And I'm bored with it.
The profile's a dying form though, because in order, I think, to have an interesting profile, it probably isn't the big artist. It's like the person making some shit in their house that no one knows yet but should know, right? Like because they will say, one, they don't really know. You know, the sweet spot is the artist who has never been profiled substantially, who is just like making some shit. You know what I mean? That seems interesting because they don't know. They want to tell you everything. Mm-hmm. They want to take you to meet their moms. You know what I mean? Like they want to have. And I think too, is the profile something that should inform the public about the depth of an artist's creative process? I think yes, but so often what happens is the profile becomes a commercial. But it's not. It's like watching a commercial and not really knowing what the product is that's being sold to you. It's just like watching a commercial. And I agree. I mean, I think if we are going to just have like SZA interviewing Kendrick Lamar, then we have to be like, all right, well, you no longer need me to function in the role of vessel for information delivery. I can now be a critic. And what I loved about the book was that you are, there's a real rigor through the act of affection in the book, particularly when it comes to music. And I wanted to ask about Lupe Fiasco specifically, because I think he's someone for whom like made like a very important album to me. Like The Cool is like, and then was this guy who for a long time was like, oh, I sometimes think about Lupe Fiasco where it's like I'm sitting down at a restaurant, the plate comes out and the plate looks really great. You know, it's like the plate is well structured and I tell the chef put a lot of time in it, and then I taste it and it's like, this actually tastes like nothing, kind of. What
are we talking about? What Lupe are we talking about? Because they have multiple.
Yeah, well, in the book you kind of address like, yeah. So I'm interested in the forms that serve you and the ones that don't. And I'm using him as a vessel to get to the way you write about artists in general. But he's the vessel here.
I think, like for me, I stopped kind of engaging with Lupe that much after. I think Lasers let me down so much that I haven't forgiven him, low-key. Like, not that I haven't forgiven him as a person, but it was just like, he had us fight for him. Like, he had people protesting outside of a label building.
To put out Lasers.
Like, it was like, this is crazy. This is like unspeakably bad. But the early Lupe was so crucial to my development because I think I encountered his music at a time when I was feeling a lot of angst around the person I felt like I was supposed to be, rather than the person I felt like I actually wanted to be.
Right.
I just didn't have sometimes we lean on, whether it be an artist or a filmmaker or what have you, like somebody that creates something. Sometimes you need to see an example of it to give yourself permission to do it. And I think Lupe came at that sweet spot for me. I think I first encountered his music, I was like 15 or 16. And this is the time where, outside of Kanye, I don't think there was that kind of artist that was trying to redefine, maybe Kanye wasn't trying to do this, but redefine what Black masculinity could look like from an urban perspective. And I think Lupe took it even a step further than Kanye did, because not only did he talk about his own emotional depth, but he also was really good at appraising what was happening around him in his community. Like, I think I really enjoy artists, and Gil Scott-Heron is like this. I think artists who can really get to the root of the conditions of their community. And it might not be something that they're personally going through, but you can feel that the care is there. Yeah. Like they feel a need to speak on the whys and the hows and the whats. And Lupe was really important for me because I think I wasn't feeling satisfied with the options that I had. And I still enjoyed the music that I listened to. I love Jeezy. I love OJ the Juice Man. I loved Gucci and all of that stuff. But I think those artists were kind of, it wasn't the artists, it was just, I felt limited. And when I encountered Lupe's music, I actually hated it at first because Kick Push was the first song that I heard. And I was like, I don't think skateboarding and rap is for me. And it was also introduced through a cousin who was like really into that kind of music. You know, him and his friends wore like checkered Vans and they had mohawks. Their jeans fit the right way at a time when jeans didn't fit the right way.
Listen.
And it just wasn't the right introduction. But I was jealous of my.
I was one of those people, you know what I mean?
Hey, we all
had a phase. Or not all, but I did.
But even in that moment when I was introduced to his music through that cousin who was like more alternative, for lack of a better term, I was jealous. You know, I was jealous of seeing him and his friends be free enough to dance and rejoice to this music that I personally felt corny, but I knew that they were being sincere. I knew that they weren't holding up this exterior for the outside world to protect themselves.
Yeah.
And I really envied that. So once I got on my own and started looking through his music, I was like, okay, maybe he's actually way more than a kick push guy. And that's when my fandom started to develop. But I would say like once I got college age, it just didn't serve the same purpose. And I think there's a lot of rappers who kind of fall within that. I don't want to call them conscious because it's reductive, but
Right.
I'll just say it for now. I think there's a struggle of that kind of rapper to hold your interest beyond the point of like coming of age into adulthood. You know, I think it's hard for those artists to kind of hold you past like I need to get out of this immature phase I'm in and started looking at life in a more realistic way. But once I actually achieved that perspective, Lupe didn't feel as necessary.
This is important because one thing about your book and your whole person is that you're so generous with the past version of yourself who loved things. And I think that is a really big problem with cultural consumption. I mean, there's many problems with our cultural consumption now where like it's a holistic whole hog thing where people are like, well, I love this person and therefore my identity is baked into them for eternity. Like I'm yoked to this person I loved when I was. This is why like nostalgia tourism is such a in music specifically is such a, you know. But you have this kind of generosity in your work with the things that you loved and then let go, and you don't kind of punish yourself for loving them or for letting them go. How do you cultivate and balance that and not fall into these traps of like, I don't know, I loved this band when I was 14 and then the lead singer did something horrible, but I can't stop loving them, you know?
Yeah, I think just being kind of a pop culture, pop music critic kind of conditions you to just shuffle through things. You know, like I
For sure.
think, especially if you want to be the type of writer who can always engage with what's being created in the present, you kind of have to get over things. Especially now, like music generations last what 3 years,
If you're
maybe.
lucky.
Um, like the music of 2020, the music of 2021 feels completely different than the music of 2025. If anything, you kind of look a little silly as a critic being wrapped up in nostalgia in a way that I don't know. I think it also depends on the time that you come up in. Like I think writers and critics who came up maybe in the '90s or the early 2000s can be more like proud of their nostalgia for whatever reason. I don't know why they feel they can be, but there's like a strong like energy behind like it was just better at this time. And,
Yeah.
and certain things were better. I'm not gonna lie. Like, but
I don't know.
not everything, not
Yeah.
everything. But I think like at least maybe there was more variety potentially.
Yeah,
At least
yeah,
in a mainstream
for sure.
in a mainstream sense, there was more variety. I think there's way
Yes.
more variety now altogether. But yeah, I think nostalgia actually doesn't serve the music critic now in the way that it could have served people that came before.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to rejoice and live in a condensed moment without saying like I'm still stuck in this moment. Like
Right.
even with local rap or like regional rap, like I think the DMV rap scene probably from like 2016 to 2019 was super super special. Like it was real momentum. Like it actually felt like people were breaking out every few months, and they were like from Rico Nasty to
Yeah.
Shorty from Baltimore to Q
Yep.
the Fool to Gunu. It was like so many artists popping up, and they had an interesting style. Their style started to permeate through like the national and international rap scenes. But I would be lying to say like I'm still stuck on it. Like I appreciate it for what it was, and maybe I thought we were going to have like this Chicago-esque blow the scene wide open, but that actually is not a real thing. I
No,
think every
not.
pocket or every region wants that for where they're from,
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
can kind of like get stuck in it. But I really appreciate it for what it was, and I can also acknowledge that that is completely over.
Will you because I have like a few Baltimore questions, but I feel like reading this might be a good time to read your little section that I wanted to.
Yeah,
I was
for
excited
sure.
to hear.
Okay. This is from. Let me find the page. This is going to be from an essay called "Good Government Job." What should resonate here, I think. Okay. Maybe I'm not as good as I think I am. I think, stuck browsing through tax filings. A future in which writing was nothing more than a side hustle from my government job felt like the most realistic possibility for me. One day in the office, Anthony walked over to my desk with a card that needed to be signed. It was a congratulatory gesture for Miss Barbara, whom I'd only spoken to in passing when I walked by her cubicle. The plan was to surprise her with a cake and gifts. The occasion? She been working here for 60 fucking years, dog. Anthony told me, shaking his head. She retired 7 years ago, got bored, and came back to start working again. I signed my name, and after lunch that day, we gathered around to celebrate Miss Barbara's 6th decade of service. While everyone stood around her and honored the milestone, she sat and looked around. She couldn't stand on her own anymore and didn't feel like depending on her walker. In her 80s, she'd given all her life to this job, working here since she was the same age as me. She probably watched her colleagues grow from young adults to great-grandparents, probably listened to the radio newscast of Martin Luther King being shot in Memphis, probably had co-workers leave this earthly plane, all while being at this same place. It launched me into an existential crisis, staring off into space, thinking how I'd rather die at this very instant than to give these niggas all the good years of my life for some shit that didn't fulfill me. It wasn't any shade towards Miss Barbara. 60 years ago, this was probably one of the most prestigious occupations a black person could have around these parts. I just couldn't fathom the idea of the same thing happening for me. After the celebration, I went back to my desk and let out a deep sigh before signing back into the ancient computer with its black screen and green type, flipping through tax filings that were starting to look identical to me. On the regular PC monitor, I logged into my Gmail account and noticed a message from an editor at the Fader who turned down the last 3 pictures I sent over. Maybe I sent over an idea that I forgot about, and they were going to tell me this one wouldn't work either. Instead, it read, "Hey Lawrence, hope all is well. Yo Gotti is coming to NYC next weekend to perform, and we're curious to know if you'd be open to coming up to spend time with him for an interview that'll run on the site." I put my head down and wept uncontrollably. Tears of relief, but also of frustration and hope. A needed sign that my current position wasn't permanent, but rather a period I needed to get through to get on the other side.
So I love that piece, and I love the ending of that piece, because similarly, like, and we've maybe talked about this, like the world of writing, the capital W world of writing just is so, it makes no sense to me. Like I didn't come up in, I don't have an MFA, like I was bad at school, I didn't study shit in college, like, and so when I walk into a lot of these spaces, it feels like there are people who maybe are not necessarily hungry or curious for the things that would inspire great writing, but are hungry and curious for like accolades, or are hungry and curious for the kind of decoration that they believe makes them a capital W writer. And I think we are both from backgrounds where it was like, to be a writer is simply to write something, you know what I mean? To like finish your, whatever your job is, and then find some hours in the day to write something, even if that something isn't publishable, quote unquote. And so there's this interest I had in hearing you talk about the aspirational aspect of wanting to be a writer while having to survive in ways that don't fulfill you.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, it's just so hard. It was the most of my writing life, I didn't have a writing job. It wasn't until, well, it's been a while now, but 2016 is when I first got my first opportunity to write full-time advice. I was 26 at the time. But before then, I worked like the worst jobs imaginable. Like I was a teller at M&T Bank. I was an usher at an art house theater. I did Uber. I worked at a cafe. Social Security was like my last like real job as I don't even know what my title was, to be honest. Like I did that little work. Like I spent so much I spent yeah, good government job. I spent so much time at my desk, really just writing articles for my own blog. Like it had come to a point where I had to be reprimanded
I know.
for like
I know.
that for the little bit of cases I was resolving per day. I think like I was pulled up and they were like, "Yeah, you resolved 7 cases this week. You're supposed to do like 20 a day." And I was like, "Oh, I didn't know that I was supposed to." I was making up the craziest lies to just be like, I'm really just trying to make it as a writer. And it was so many frustrating times where I talk about like the Fader at that time was like the epitome of taste and like music criticism and culture writing. And the fact that they wouldn't accept my pitch really kind of like put that thing in the back of my mind of like, oh, maybe I'll just be working this desk job for the foreseeable future, like Miss Barbara. Like I don't know if I can even last 60 years in here, but it's looking like that's more close to my reality than writing in the newsroom.
Yeah.
But I think those experiences, I don't want to say they make you a better writer, but I think they give you more texture. They give you some perspective that's useful.
And you learn how to hustle, or you
Yeah.
relearn a different. Like if you grew up around hustlers, you relearn a hustle.
Yeah,
Like there's
yeah.
there's an impulse to hustle kind of baked into you if you grew up around hustlers. Depending on, I mean, hustlers are regional, so depending on what kind of hustlers you grew up around. And I think like I don't know. I remember the Fader, since we are on a Fader arc, when I was like towards the end of my tenure at my last 9 to 5, which I also fucking hated, and got reprimanded for not working at, the Fader hit me up and was like, "Will you come to New York like tomorrow to write a profile?" Does anyone know the noise artist Dream Crusher?
Mhm.
You know Dream Crusher for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah,
I
of
mean,
course.
like, so we know Dream Crusher, but you should all listen to Dream Crusher. And they was like, "Will you come up and drive to New York?" And I was like, "All right, I'm at my job right now. I could leave at 1. Then, hit me up at 11 a.m. And I went to the bathroom. It's like, it turns out I'm sick. You know what I mean? Got to go home. And I'm like driving to New York and then driving back. And I don't miss that in a material sense. Talk about how nostalgia doesn't serve you. Like it's easy to
I miss the
romanticize,
chase.
but I miss the chase. You
I
know what
miss
I
the
mean?
chase. Like
I miss the chase of it.
yeah, in that same essay, I tell a story about how when Drum first came out, for those that remember Drum, Cha Cha was like his big song, and Drake swiped it. That's how we got Hotline Bling. It's too deep to get into, but when Drum like first hit, like maybe like a week and a half after Cha Cha came out, I just DM'd him. It was like I miss those days of being like
Yes.
a young, hungry writer where it's like I'm just gonna reach out to
Reach out
people,
to whoever.
and it's like if you hit me back,
Yeah.
I'll come to your city, like I'll do it. And he hit me back, and I think I did it on the weekend. Like it was that kind of grind. It's like I got off work on Friday, went to go pick up 2 of my homies, and we drove from Baltimore to Hampton, Virginia, maybe like a 3-hour, 3.5, 4-hour ride or something like that. Met up with Drum, and we saw him at like a little bar, and somebody rolled past blasting Cha Cha, and it was the first time that he had heard somebody playing his music
Shit.
out of that car. And then it was like a house party later that day, and I was so exhausted I fell asleep. But apparently Chad Hugo pulled up to the house party, and the next morning Drum was like on the verge of tears, like, "Oh my God, I met Chad Hugo." And I just miss being part of that. Like, it's nothing better than when you kind of come up with the artists in your realm, and it's like you there's a common understanding amongst young people who just want to make something of themselves. And most times those young people are kind of operating with their backs against the wall, but your level of fear is so slim that it doesn't matter. Like I was making so little dollars at my Social Security job. It was like $30K annually. It was insane. I don't even know how I was surviving, but I made it work. I was still taking that little bit of money and printing zines at home,
Yeah.
or going to
Yeah,
FedEx
yeah.
office and going to the shows or throwing shows with my friends and taking pictures on my own sometimes. I have no idea how to take photos. But it was just like, I have to do it. If I want to tell this story, nobody can tell it in the way that I want to tell it. So yeah, I'm like you said, you don't miss it in the material sense, but you do miss the exhilaration.
I want to talk about. It's funny that you mentioned Chad Hugo, Yo, speaking of that Clips album, you know who else misses Chad Hugo?
I was talking about that recently, but I want to know what you got to say.
Nah, man. I think there are some sonic inconsistencies that I think sometimes, because people used to always be like, what does Chad Hugo bring to the Neptunes? Mm-hmm. But it's actually just like a grounding Pharrell's worst impulses. It's almost like the same thing that like Meg White brings to the White Stripes, you know what I mean? If there's no Meg White, then like Seven Nation Army would just be like a 5-minute guitar solo, you know what I mean? And so you actually need a Chad Hugo to be like, maybe not this. And there are points on the Clips album where I was like, why that? and there's some good production on there in spots, but there's some spots where I was like, you need the guy, you need the other guy.
Those first 2 songs for sure.
Yeah. Like I think Chains and Whips is fine, but like literally, I was like, why the guitar? I don't think the guitar is helping the beat. And I sometimes think Pharrell is. Yeah. Anyway, we only have like 5 minutes for audience to ask questions, and I desperately want to talk about Baltimore and the cultural imagination of the country and how that actually does not reflect. And I know that's not uncommon in almost every city, but I also think Baltimore is a city that has been portrayed to the public, like projected to the public, and through all these popular cultural lenses, and I think it is deeply misunderstood in a way that's similar to, say, Detroit. Quite frankly, in a way that's similar to Memphis, like in a way that's similar to quite like black cities, right? Like black
St.
American
Louis.
cities, St. Louis, deeply St. Louis. Like there's this way that if you were to only consume Baltimore through its cultural production that the world sees, your brain would be so fucked up about it. And so I'm interested in your process as a writer that is not touristy, like the way you write about place is rooted in deep affection without being touristy and without being like trying to convince, you know what I mean? Like I'm trying to sell you on this place. Like it's coming from a deep love of the place already, and therefore it's like I know what I'm doing. How do you cultivate that, and how do you resist yourself from trying to correct the record?
I mean, it's interesting because the motivation is definitely the resistance that you face from the outside world. I have an essay in the book called 2 Pillars where I talk about my experience. My first year of college, I went to school in Brooklyn, New York, at a school called Long Island University. And we had these show and tell moments where everybody would play the music from where they were from, or, the New York guys obviously play like New York stuff. They play like French Montana or Jada Kiss or the battle rap scene or whatever. And I would play club music and people would just be like, I have no idea what that is. And also, like, I've never really been to Baltimore, but I drove through it one time and it looked like a bomb went off there. Or like, I know you had a really hard life. How did you make it through? Or how accurate is The Wire? Or, it's like you kind of get inundated with these really one-dimensional questions. And in some instances, you can get upset at the person, but when you kind of like zoom out, it's like, what else would I expect them to think? When you like look at TV shows, you look at news, you look at crime or whatever, it's like the bread and butter of how Baltimore is portrayed is either drugs, political corruption, policing, and it's really hard for people to look at it in any other way, to the point where when you try to convince others of its beauty, you almost get pushback. It's like, no, that can't be real. So I think my motivation was definitely resistance, but I think I'm also turned off by writing that tries to convince the humanity of people. And I never wanted to frame Baltimore in that way because I also think that doesn't serve people. I think what serves people is to tell what I know to be true. I know what Baltimore truly is because I came up in the communities that are mythologized and reduced in the media. So instead of saying, hey, we don't do crime, it's like, I would never do that. Like every city has crime. So it's like, it's not about that. It's about there's more than crime.
Yeah.
It's more than drugs. There's more than, it's like all these things that you feel the need to course correct, but I think the best way to course correct is to actually just show the liveliness of a community. And that's what I've always tried to do. I've always tried to, and I spoke about this yesterday. I think the best way to go about it really is just to be a documentarian. You know, that's all I'm really trying to be. You know, I'm trying to honor people that deserve to be honored. You know, you come from a city that's reduced in that way. What really people don't talk about enough is the people that are from there that start to internalize that and what it does to a person's ambitions. It's like, I have to get out of here, or I'm not going to make it from here. And I think if I could serve any role really as a journalist and a storyteller, is to let people know, like, no, like, what you're doing is actually really important. What you're doing is beautiful. You know, it's contributing to a long legacy of people who have made things. And that's really what I'm always trying to do. I'm trying to point out a lineage. It's not about trying to convince anybody of anything. It's really trying to convince others where I'm from that, no, we come from a long line of really amazing artists and storytellers and painters and chefs and all of these things. All we're doing right now is just building onto that history. So even when I'm trying to tell a story of what's happening now, that's why I also make it a point to dig into the past, so people can understand that there's a legacy to be built, and we're building it today, even if we don't recognize it.
I'll ask one last question before we get to audience folks, mostly because I feel like someone will ask this and I want to cut to that, like think about something other than this one. What are you listening to or immersing yourself in now that you're excited about?
I'm listening to it was funny, my partner is saying, I'm sure she's really sick of me listening to this song, but there's a rapper named Serafina the Great.
Oh yeah.
Who I believe she might have grown up in the States, but I don't know where, but she's also from the Ivory Coast. So she raps in French, she raps in English.
It sometimes like weaves in and out of
weaves in and out of it. And the production that she uses is more like the traditional music from the Ivory Coast, which I think is really interesting. I listen to her a lot. I listen to Skywater a lot, which makes me feel like I'm trying to be a cool young person to say that I listen to Skywater. But Skywater is a British artist who kind of doesn't sound British. He's more like on his Playboy Cardi type vibe. Ashake has never left my rotation ever since he came out. Even though I do think the music is starting to get a little repetitive, I would like to hear him like switch it up a little.
I don't know if he has the depth.
I don't think it might not change. It might not change. I love it for what
thrilled.
it is.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I'm thrilled for what it is.
He could just keep making I'm a piano music that's with a Nigerian tinge if he wants to. Like, and I'm cool with that. Ashake, and there's a host of like Baltimore rappers that I kind of like. I don't know if I'm like a biggest fan of the music they're making more than I'm just like happy that they're continuing to like cultivate a scene and try to make it shake. But though I would say those are like the three that I'm listening to a lot right now.
There's something really interesting about being from a place and having musicians come out of that place and not perhaps being a fan of the music, of being like, well, look at that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I'm just proud. You know, like I love that you're doing what you're doing. I'm going to do what I can to shed light on it.
For sure.
I'm just happy that it exists. You know, because when I was coming up, like it wasn't an abundance of Baltimore rappers to listen to. It was like more of a club music city in the same way that DC was a go-go city. It was like we had local rappers, but they weren't celebrated necessarily. People listened to rap from other places, and it probably wasn't until like the late 2000s where it was like a healthy enough number of local rappers where you can maybe mix them into your rotation. And now we're at a place where like regional rap is so bountiful that you can just straight up listen to rap from any one place and be satisfied. And I just like that is a reality.
For sure. Questions from the audience, hit the mic, walk on up. The first Baltimore rapper I remember hearing, I was like 12 or 13. Who was that dude who sampled
the Jeffersons?
Who was that?
Be Rich.
Yeah.
Whoa Now.
God, I remember Whoa Now being like.
It actually made it to NBA Live, which was cool.
Yes, that is the first time I heard it. I was playing NBA Live, and I remember the video. And that music video was the first time I saw Baltimore because I was like 12.
Yeah.
in a say, and I had to. Yeah. Anyway, questions from you all.
Hey, thank you guys so much for being here tonight. In all total honesty, Lawrence, I only discovered you last night listening to the new episode of Victory Light.
Okay.
So I loved you on there here. You being here with Hanif, absolutely. One thing I want to touch about that I heard on the podcast, obviously being from Maryland, the flag is like the thing we are willing to die on. But you were quick to point out that in the design of the flag, it's a concession. The red and white part is a concession to the Confederacy. So my question is, do you feel like, as you've mentioned, there is this push towards legitimizing and honoring Baltimore, but do you think that the first battle is just doing it to the rest of the people of Maryland who only see Baltimore through their car window driving through in I-95?
Okay, let me make sure I got what you were saying correctly. Are you saying that it's part of my motivation to paint Baltimore in a particular way in answer to the rest of the state?
Or do you just think that Baltimore is misinterpreted even just by people living in Maryland as well?
Most definitely. There are people that live in this part of, this isn't Maryland, but it's like 3 lights down the street.
Yeah.
There are people that I know for sure probably have never spent a significant time in Baltimore, and that's only because of how Baltimore is framed in the media. Like I've met friends from this part of Maryland, or maybe even the Eastern Shore of Maryland, who are told by their family that you cannot go there on your own. So for sure, it's the ugly stepchild of the state. It's, and not even just from a personal level. It's dealt with that way on a government level. Even until recently, Baltimore didn't control its own transportation. It didn't control its police. It's not connected to much of the state through transit. All of that feels super intentional. So for sure, it's not just a national thing. It's very much local how Baltimore is seen and thought of.
Thank you.
Hey guys, thanks both of y'all for coming. I thought that discussion was really insightful. I wanted to follow up on how y'all started the beginning of the talk, which was talking about like criticism and how like the journalism in the music industry is kind of pivoting more into like this sort of access journalism sense, and we're seeing that across like, of course, literary, other parts of culture like food, travel, things like that. And I'm really interested to hear one, how you think we got to this point. And a second part of that I've been really thinking about a lot is kind of the proliferation of the ability to kind of project your own voice via social media or through a YouTube channel. The proliferation of that, to your point, like when you were talking about, hey, maybe the blogging of like the mid to late 2000s is back. That's changed the calculus a lot. So I'm really curious to hear like how you think we got to this point and whether that plays a role in it.
I just think print media was just not doing too well. I think it just really just comes down to the survival of publications, which is obviously has a lot to do with advertising. And I think a lot of publications feel like they're not in a position to take hard stances against artists, against the wishes of an artist team. I think that's where it starts. And obviously, like you said, like the existence of like the video essayists on YouTube, or like the video blogger at this point, that complicates us as well, because I'm not meeting there's obviously young people that want to be journalists and want to be critics, and there are plenty of young people who do engage with creativity in that way, but I don't think it is as sexy and appealing as being able to hop in front of a computer screen and just talk about how you feel rather than to write it out. And I also think critics are villainized in a particular way that digital media members, I don't know what you would call them, but bloggers are, I don't think they're villainized in the same way. I think there's been a concerted effort to paint journalists and critics in a particular way socially that makes it less appealing to young people. Like, people don't want to be like, here's this guy again. Like, here he is with his opinions, or, it's like that kind of thing. And I don't think that's always probably been a thing. But there's way less support for it. I'm curious what you think.
Well, I think people, there was a healthy balance once, and not maybe not even in my lifetime, but there was once a healthy balance of people who revered writing and cared about writing as a form of contextualization. And now I think that reverence is placed on artists. You don't actually care. Like, I won't name any artists because I don't want to stir any shit up. But there are artists sometimes where I see their rollouts or their tour campaigns, and they're actually not saying anything. They're not telling a story. They're not doing anything. It's just a lot of hollow symbolism in a row. And you can tell that no one is asking them any hard questions. And therefore, they're not internalizing any hard questions because you just want to be McDonald's. You just want to feed as many people as possible. It doesn't actually matter what they're eating. And a writer could be a stopgap between that because a critic, could ask some hard questions of a music maker. But like, for example, when that SZA interview with Kendrick came out and people were fawning over some of those quotes, especially that one where he was like, well, I'm both masculine and feminine because I make art. I was like, what the fuck? People were sharing that shit everywhere like, this is so insightful. And I was like, this man just said he's feminine because he makes art. Like, what? I don't actually think people thought that shit was insightful. I think they were just like, SZA and Kendrick Lamar are talking.
That was it.
Yeah. And so there's actually no critical stopgap. And that means that people have then conditioned themselves to just consume whatever and be like, the name is the thing. And it is because it's been years, so the embargo's up. But MTV News, when I was writing, you might know this because you're in media. MTV News was bought down. That whole era of MTV News was bought down by one Chance the Rapper review that wasn't even that bad. Yeah. It was a Chance the Rapper concert review where in the review the person was like, I just can't get into this motherfucker dancing with puppets on stage because I'm a grown man. And Chance, he said it much nicer than that, but that one thing, that sentence, dismantled a whole writing entity. Like MTV News collapsed because Chance the Rapper was like, well, now I'm not going to do the VMAs. And then Viacom was like, put that review, delete that review from the site. And it became so, that's too much power for any artist to have in the service of not critically engaging their own work.
Yeah. Cool. I thought you were going to say something else. You was like, I had another point.
Basically, we're doomed.
Basically.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
What's going on? My name is Lafayette. Glad to be here. Love the book. Congratulations.
Thank you, bro.
I was going to say, I come from, my family owns a newspaper here in D.C., and, we've been seeing the impact of sort of resources being available to our company from DEI cuts and technological advancements. And so I wonder, as a writer, right, how do you have you thought about how your voice could be done in other ways, like movies or books, videos or, other forms of content? Then also another thing I noticed is that most content nowadays is sponsored, so it's you can see something cool, but it's sponsored by Pepsi or they're selling you McDonald's or something like that. So how do you maintain your voice and freedom when you also need to make money doing what you're doing?
To your first question, I'm actually working on a film right now. It's a documentary film that's under the same title as the essay in the book called Revisiting Ramona, where I'm engaging with a book that documented the block that I grew up on. So I'm kind of it's a portrait of the artist, but it's also me trying to mirror the visual and poetic language of the book in a moving image way. But yeah, who doesn't want to make a movie or something like that? But I don't really think that's what I am. I really identify as being a writer. I think writing, but I think the beautiful thing about writing is that it's the foundation for so many other forms of cultural production. You have to write a script, you have to write a treatment. It takes writing to make almost everything. So that offers me some comfort in terms of how I can navigate my future. It's not a sure thing, but I think my skill set can be applied to quite a few other forms of creativity.
How do you like the second question. So then when it becomes like, okay, great, you got the show, but we need you to put a Pepsi in the shot or whatever. Like, how do you sort of navigate that?
I haven't personally faced that yet. Like I don't. I'm probably not really interested in podcasting, maybe because of that reason. Like I don't want to do a manscaping ad. Like I don't want to advocate for people shaving their pubes. Like it's not really my thing. So who knows?
That was an interesting place to go.
Because when you're listening to a really good podcast,
Yeah,
and you just
maybe I don't listen to podcasts that much. Is that what they on? Word.
Certain podcasts in a certain
Whoa.
realm of the podcast world,
Yeah.
that's men centered. They almost all have a manscaping ad, like almost every single one.
Damn, I don't be listening to the podcast. That's wild.
I'm probably in the wrong corner of YouTube, to be honest, if I'm being completely honest. But I hope that answered your question. I'm hoping I can avoid that as long as I can.
Who inspired you to write this book?
What inspired me to write it?
Who?
Who?
Yes.
People like Hanif, people like Kiese, Layman, people like Dream Hampton, people like Greg Tate. All the writers that came before me, I think just kind of give you a roadmap, even if they don't know that's what they're doing. I read so much of Hanif's work while working on this book. I read so much of a lot of really amazing Black writers while I wrote this book. I would say, and then obviously like the community, my city where I'm from, all the stories are kind of derived from that, my family, the neighborhoods that I grew up in. But in terms of like giving me the permission to like really set myself free and like really give myself fully to the work, I would say it was the writers that came before me. Yeah, thank you.
Hey y'all, can y'all hear me okay? Okay, cool. Hey, my name is Jess. I'm from Northern Virginia, but I live in DC. I'm a musician, I'm an organizer, former emo kid. Yeah, and I'm a really big fan of both of y'all. One of my favorite artists is Gil Scott-Heron, so I was so excited to read your book in the first chapter of that, and especially really excited by how you describe Brian Jackson, because my favorite Gil Scott-Heron album is actually Bridges. So it was great to see the representation in that. I'm part of the local music scene here, and when I moved here, I was actually so surprised to see that, like, despite a lot of the musicians like being from here, living in the Imperial Core, and existing here, there's not like an inherent need to like politicize our music and like be rooted in the communities, and kind of like tie our music into that. And yeah, I guess I see a difference in like big artists now and like how folks used to be in the 70s. A lot of the music that came out of that was anti-war music, right? Marvin Gaye, even Black Sabbath, they were British. They were writing music about the war. And before y'all come for me, I'm not trying to do this whole like nostalgia tourism type thing, but I am wondering, like my initial question was going to be like, what do you think the role of music is in liberation work? But now I'm wondering, like, what kind of culture shift do you think it's going to take to help artists and musicians understand that, like, they cannot, just like ignore the conditions that they exist in?
I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the state of journalism. Like, I think artists are afraid of their access being revoked. Like, I think there are a lot of calls from the top of record labels or streaming sites that discourage artists from speaking out against things that they actually know is wrong. And I think the way that music is consumed now, people have so little control of how they get their music across that they don't know how to navigate outside of it. I don't know what the cultural shift needs to be. Like, hopefully things don't have to get worse. They're already pretty bad. I don't know. I think until maybe artists come together and unionize or create some other platform to get their music out. I mean, Bandcamp is a good place, I think. But I don't know if Bandcamp is popular enough for everybody to start consuming their music that way. I wish I had the answer, but I don't, because I
Yeah.
think about the same thing. I talk about the same thing all the time. Like, I love listening to music from a Gil Scott-Heron or
Right.
Fela, or even hip hop from the 80s and 90s, specifically the late 80s and early 90s, where people really stood for something. It's hard to tell who stands for what now. I think if anything, the music artists that I see standing for something, it might not come out of their music. It's more like how they engage the public or how they utilize their social medias. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think people just have to get a little more crafty. I imagine.
I'm gonna only say a few things. So I could talk about this. I was like talking about this a lot this week. I think the musicians with the least to lose are often the ones who are behaving in a way that would not suggest they have the least to lose, and so they're not taking any risks. They're not using any kind of. And what that means is the musicians who have the most to lose. So let's look at, say, Bob Dylan or Fontaine CC or
Right.
these groups who are not at the level of a Kendrick Lamar. Or let's look at Kendrick Lamar's halftime show, right?
Right.
Where there's all this kind of like vague symbolism. And then in the midst of that, someone with a lot to lose was like, I'm going to make a very clear statement about
Exactly.
Sudan, about Gaza.
Yeah.
And a person who, by the way, was like just arrested like last week, right? And to me, the question is, from your position of not having a ton to lose, what are you doing to bridge the gap between yourself and those who have more to lose? Because that's how like cross-class solidarity is built.
Right.
That's all across. And so like if musicians think in that way, if someone were to say, for example, this band from the UK, if we're thinking about Bob Dylan, for example, has lost in the past like 3 weeks, has lost so many opportunities. But if someone was like, a big artist is like, I'm actually going to fly over there and do a show with them and bring a lot of people out. And we are going to talk on stage about what we believe. That would be huge. But there's actually no way that you can earn the position of having very little to lose without really abandoning a kind of radical politic, I think. You don't earn, I mean, you don't have to, it's not a requirement, but like now it feels more like a requirement. NWA may fuck the police because they were acting in a manner of documenting and like journalistic integrity. It was like, I am from this place, the police are fucking with us, this is what comes out of that. And they did that understanding it would both cause great harm and perhaps be beneficial to them in the process. But that's what was provocative at one point. It was provocative to turn towards an oppressive system and say, fuck that. And now what's provocative is like, there's a symbol that might mean something or it might mean nothing, but it could mean something. And that doesn't really provoke me, I think. It actually enrages me, honestly, because we have, I said I was only going to say a couple, I should stop. We have everything we need from a standpoint of witness. We are gaining very plain and clear information,
Yeah.
right? And so I'm actually not that interested in pop stars being like, here's a vague symbol. This shit ain't, we're not living through vague times. We're living
Right.
through, the
Very
apocalypse is not
specific.
vague, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
The end of the world ain't vague. And so I could give a fuck about like the reclamation of, I don't know. Anyway, yes.
Okay.
I'm going
you
to stop
both.
because I would talk forever.
Yeah, that was a great answer. Thank you both.
Hello. Do I have to say my name? No? Okay, great. So I have a question. Since this is a collection of essays, what is one thing you want the readers to take away after they finish reading all of your collection of essays?
One thing, I don't know if it's one particular thing. I think if I had to say anything, I would want people to understand the gravity and the complexity and the layers that exist in all of the art and all of the creativity that we absorb on a daily basis. I think if anything, like one of my main goals with this book was, I talk about like mainstream artists and stuff like that all the time, but I'm really trying to drive the point home that that same level of attention and rigor that's applied to talking about somebody like a Kendrick Lamar, the local rapper who has 1,500 listens on his biggest song, is also deserving of that same attention. If I had any one goal, it would be that. Like that's my agenda. Like I want to read about this unknown artist from Little Rock, Arkansas. I don't want to say unknown, but maybe not widely known on a national scale. Like I love being able to dip into regional scenes and find the most that I can find out as possible. And if I can lend my hand of being a resource for anybody that's interested in anything that comes from, whether it be Baltimore or DC or other parts of Maryland, or even like some of the artists I engaged when I went to Lagos in Nigeria or Joburg, who weren't like the most popular artists there, but they were interesting. That's what I would want.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Thank you,
Thank
Lawrence, Hanif. If you haven't bought the book already, it's at the front of the store at the register. Let's give them a round of applause for a great event.